I have this report here in Excel. I've downloaded it from a system, but it's not in a very good format. There are these blank rows here. These are my headers, so I don't really want those two rows. I can't really do any analysis on this work because I can't put filters on these. I've got these subtotals here as well, so I can't even highlight this column here and look down here and find out what my sum is because I'm be double counting. I've got these here and then the subtotals, and then also at the bottom I've even got a grand total. So it's not going to give me the right figure. It'll take quite a while for me to actually do any analysis on these outstanding orders. So there's the PO number, the vendor name, the part numbers and the part description, just the purchase order date and the delivery date, quantities, number of parts ordered, the price of the part, and then the line total. And there's another PO here for the same vendor, and some of the products are going to be repeated throughout this. So it's just a list of all our outstanding orders at the moment with different vendors. I want to run this report regularly, so any transformations that I make, I want those to work on the report tomorrow or next week, rather than me having to go through all these, maybe deleting these, deleting this. It's going to take a long time, and every time I run that report I'm going to have to do the same thing. So Power Query can help me with that. I'll set it up in Power Query once, and then I've only got to download the report from the system and connect it in a certain way so those amendments will be made to any future reports I download. In order to do that, because there are different options with Power Query, if I go to Data, I can do it from Table Range. So if I were to do it here, it's not going to recognise this as a table. It's not consecutive data. I want tabular data. And other amendments I'm going to have to make is I'm going to have to fill the PO number down. I need to add the vendor name against each line as well. Once it's in tabular format, I can then do analysis on it. I can then have a pivot table, charts feeding off that data, whereas I can't do anything with this. So it's not going to work even if I selected the whole range. Then when I come to run a new report, it's not going to work because I specified this range, but that might be a different length. There might be less or more orders, so it's not really going to work. I'll save this file in a folder. Every time I download the latest version, it will overwrite this report. But I'll just get on and show you so you know what I mean. I can close this one, and here's my blank worksheet that I've just called Outstanding Orders Power Query. So this is the one that does the transformations. So get data, I'm on my data tab, from file, from Excel workbook. I have a folder called Outstanding Orders Latest. This is the file I'm in at the moment. I want to link it to this Outstanding Orders report. This is always going to be the latest one I downloaded from the system. It'll just keep overwriting this one. So I'm linking this to this. So I'll import that. This is the sheet. I do have to be careful because this sheet name is the date, and that will be hard keyed into my Power Query navigation. So I'll have to change that. But again, once I do that, I'll explain it to you. So this is my report here, transform data. And here's my report. You can kind of recognise some of the information there to what we were just looking at. First of all, I'm just going to rename this. It's got the 21st of April on, but it's just going to be the latest report. So I'm just going to call this Outstanding Orders and not put a date on it. It's always going to be called Outstanding Orders. Power Query has automatically applied these steps. The source is the file path, and you see the folder is Outstanding Orders Latest and the file name Outstanding Orders Report. That's correct. So whenever I open my spreadsheet, it's always going to pull that report in to get the data from whatever file the latest version of that file is. Navigation, this is where we have to be careful. You can see here the source, it's hard keyed the 2104-2024. When I run that report tomorrow, that sheet name will actually be called 2204-2024, or next week it'll be called, I'm going to do it on the 30th, it's going to be called the 30th 04. So my Power Query is going to get stuck here because it's looking for a sheet name 21st 04 2024. So what I can do, I can delete all of this so it's not hard keyed and just put a 0 in. And what it's going to do is just going to pull the first sheet in that file and green tick that and move on to the next step. Promoted headers, it's just done that title. My headers are actually on this row here, so that's wrong. And the change type is just to do with if this is text, if it's a number, and it automatically does that. So once I correctly promote the headers, it will redo the change type. So I can delete this and delete this. So I want to get rid of this top row. I can't just filter out like I normally would. I would just untick that. So it automatically removes that title because the title contains the date. So next time when I run the report, it's looking for this title and it's not going to find it. If it was just called outstanding stock POs in that cell, I could do that. I could just untick that. I just need to use the text filters instead and say filter where that cell does not begin with, and I'm just going to use the word outstanding. Okay, so now I can promote the headers. On my home tab, I've got this use first row as headers. I've got these errors here. In my report, I don't think this was anything. They were just blank cells. I'm not sure why they're errors, but I don't want them anyway. And I've got these totals here as well. So I want to get rid of those lines because if I want to do subtotals, I can do that in a pivot table. So I just want tabular data. So I can go onto this drop down here and get rid of where that cell is total. And it removes that row. I also want to get rid of these eventually, but at the moment I can't because I need the vendor name and the PO number is actually only on that row at the moment. I need to fill this down. I want the PO number against every line here, so I have tabular data and then eventually also have the vendor name against it. What I'm going to do at this point is duplicate this query. So I'm just going to right click here and duplicate, and I'm just going to rename this vendors. I actually just need the PO number and the vendor name. You can see it's called description because the vendor name wasn't in the right place in the original report. It's lumped in with all the descriptions. I don't need the vendor code, I just want the vendor name. So I can delete all these other columns. Rather than me just clicking on all of these and deleting them, I'm actually just going to select the ones that I want to keep, the PO and this column here, and remove other columns. And then I just need the PO and the vendor name for that PO. So they're just on these rows here. So I can then go here and remove all the blanks. So that's all the descriptions. So now I've got a list of all the PO numbers and the corresponding vendor. I can then merge that into my full report. Before I do that, I just need to make a few more adjustments here. I need to fill this down because I'm eventually going to get rid of these lines. I don't really want that line there, mainly because of this here. So I need to fill this down so these are on these rows here against each line, and then I can get rid of it. Again, there's a few issues here. With a blank cell in Power Query, it should say null, like here. Sometimes if it's not a completely blank cell, it will look like this. So if I put my cursor, so if you see I do it here, if I put my cursor here, it gives me a little preview here. If I put my cursor here, and then in here, and I arrow left, you're going to see there's a couple of spaces there. It moves along. So it's not a completely blank cell. What I'm going to do is just highlight this and trim it. Transform, format, trim to get rid of any extra spaces. It still hasn't come up with null, so what I'm also going to do is replace values, replace blank with null. Okay, now I can fill down. I'll just show you that it wouldn't have worked before I trimmed it. So if I go back a couple of steps before I trimmed it, if I go to this and fill down, insert that step, I've got this filled down here, but it didn't actually fill those PO numbers down. So I'm just going to delete that and go back to the end, my last step here, and now I'm going to fill down. And it's worked. So you might find this in some of your data, you might have to be a bit creative and look out for these sort of things. So I can now get rid of this row and all these other rows which has got those errors and nulls on them, because I've now got my PO number here, and because I've got the PO numbers listed here with the corresponding vendor, it doesn't matter that I get rid of the vendor here because I'll merge it in afterwards. So I'm just going to pick this column here. I could pick any of them really, but I'm just going to pick this one here. I want to get rid of everything that's got a null here, so I can see that's going to then get rid of all those, the rows I want it to. So just be careful with your data then, be familiar with it. Just make sure you're not getting rid of something where in other columns there might be data that you actually need. No. So that looks a lot better. That's tabular data. I just don't have the vendor name at the moment. So just go to Home, Merge, and PO number on my report, and in the vendors file the PO number, and it matches all of them. So that's worked. I do have another video on the Power Query basic merge in case you're a bit lost. So I've merged the queries. This is the column. It's a table at the moment. I just need to extract that data from that vendor table. I don't need the PO number column because I already have the PO number in this file. So I can remove that. This I just untick. It's just to do with the headers. And all I want to do is bring in the description column. It's called description, but it's actually got the vendor name in it. And I can rename that here, vendor. It probably would have been better for me to have renamed it here so it's less confusing, and renamed it vendor there. But it did originally, if I go back a few steps, it is actually the description column. So I've got my vendors. I'm just going to bring that, if I just click on it and drag it, I'm just going to drag it here. So I've got the PO number, the corresponding vendor, and then the list of parts with the descriptions here. I just want to do a few checks that this is all correct with regards to my where it's done the change type. This is text, that's correct. Text, text. Although these are numbers, they're not numbers I would do calculations on, so it is actually text. Text, date. This one it didn't pick up that it was a date, so I'm just going to click on here and change it. Date. And obviously I want my quantities and these prices to be numbers. The quantity is just a whole number. There would be no harm in changing this to decimal, just in case you've got something that are like maybe a cable length or something. Price, I'm going to put it as currency, and value I'm also going to put as currency. So that's all the data. That's exactly what I wanted, tabular data. I've got no blank rows, no extra rows, subtotals. So now I can close and load. I actually don't need these vendors, that was just a helper query, so I can actually just load to only create a connection. Okay, I don't actually need to see that, so I can just delete that. It's only deleting the tab, it's not deleting the data. That data's still there. If I went back into Power Query, that's still there. So I just have this. I'm just going to quickly scroll through, make sure it looks all right. Power Query always comes back in this format, so you can always just go in and remove the format. But actually I think I want this as a pivot table, so I'm just going to actually change the load to, for my outstanding orders, rather than a table, a pivot table report. Okay, and then I'm going to select all of these. So if I wanted to, I could add the subtotals. So if I go to design, and then I've got subtotals, the PO, and also by the vendor. I don't need that because it's just duplicating it. If I go to vendor here, field settings, subtotals, none. So that's just for the vendor field. So that's better. That's just a subtotal each PO. And this SKU also has a subtotal, so I'll just do the same for that. There you go. So it's just a bit shorter. So you just got your subtotals here if you want them. I actually normally don't have them. I don't always like having them. And I can change the headers. Just leave the space in and just get rid of that sum of. You need to leave the space in because Excel doesn't like it if it's got the same name as one of the fields here. So if I try it here, unit price, it's already the name of a field. Although it's this field, it's the sum of already exists. So just to get around that, you just put a space in front of it. Just leave the space in. So it's not exactly the same, but it looks the same. And I can change these to currency, value field settings, number format, currency. It's up to you. I know that my data doesn't actually have, they're all whole numbers, but if you do have decimal places, you probably want to keep them in, but I know that I don't have any, so no decimal places. And the same for this one. Value field settings, number format, currency, no decimal places. So that looks a bit nicer. If you just want it in tabular, you could just get rid of the, if I go to the design, subtotals, do not show subtotals, I can then just copy the pivot table and just have summaries. I'm just going to leave that. So I can go to pivot table analyze, select entire pivot table, Control C to copy. I'm just going to do it here, Control V to paste, and then in my, I just go to here and pivot table analyze to bring up the field list here. I could then just get rid of some of these. I could just say, let's get rid of those here. So then I've just got a list of POs with the vendor and the totals of the whole order. I could just paste it again, and I'm just going to paste it again. So for this one, if I just go to my pivot table analyze field list to bring it back, I could just have it by vendor. So they're all my vendors, and they're the total values of outstanding orders. And then here, let's get my list back. I could just have, I'll just delete those. So this is the full tabular data. Here are the PO numbers just with the vendor name and the values per PO. Here are the values just by vendor, and that's the grand total of outstanding orders. I saved another version of the outstanding orders report as of the 30th of April. So I'm just going to open that. That was that original format. The grand total is slightly different. That's what we'll be looking out for. So there's a new order, 2,700, entered 2,700, and I deleted the first order. So when we refresh this report, that will have disappeared. There's a new order ending in 2,700, which will be the latest, and that value has gone up to 42,000. Let's have a look here. 42,870. Well, I just want to check before I actually close this file. So if you want to go back into your Power Query and you've lost that pane, just go to Data, Queries and Connections. Just want to check here my refresh options. Properties. So refresh the connection on refresh all. I also want it to refresh the data when opening the file, so we don't have to do anything. I'm going to close this file, overwrite the older version, the 21st of April, with the version of the 30th, and then just open this file and see the changes. So OK that, close this, file, save a copy. So I've got my report for the 30th of April. I want to save it in this outstanding orders report, and I'm going to overwrite the 21st of April's data with this. Yes, I want to overwrite it. Close this, and then when I open my Power Query file with all the transformations, it's just loading. So at the moment it does still say 41. It has still got that 542 there. So now 542 has disappeared. That's now up to 42,870. And there should be a new order there, 2,700. So that's just a real life example of how you can use Power Query. Obviously I could have charts feeding off this as well. They're going to update, so I could just have another sheet here, maybe some charts on, a bit like a dashboard, and they're just going to update as well. I've got some other Power Query videos as well that you can watch so you can properly get your head around it and be more information in each one, and you can work out how you can implement this into your reports.